They thought they'd mapped every ounce of gold in the Yukon, until Kevin Beets' excavator hit something that wasn't supposed to exist. What started as a normal dig turned into the most secretive find in modern gold rush history. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because what you're about to hear might never make it to TV. The morning started like any other. Diesel roaring, gravel flying, and Kevin pacing the cut with his headset on, watching for pay dirt readings. But when his bucket hit the ground this time, the sound was off. A sharp, hollow clang instead of the muted thud of permafrost. He killed the machine instantly. Even the crew froze, waiting for his signal. He climbed down, knelt in the trench, and brushed away the gravel with his glove. The metallic scrape that followed wasn't bedrock, and it definitely wasn't pipe. At first, everyone assumed frozen drift, solid permafrost, locked for centuries. But when they ran the thermal scanner over it, the screen showed something that stopped Kevin cold. Dark voids under the surface. Air pockets. Whatever was beneath them wasn't just a buried boulder. It was a cavity, structured, deliberate, maybe even built. Kevin ordered the excavator to dig a cross-trench to trace the obstruction's outline. Within hours, the iron shape stretched across the cut, straight, rigid, and too uniform to be natural. He stepped back and stared at the formation revealed under the Yukon dirt. An iron frame, corroded but intact, hidden deeper than any claim should have gone. Tony arrived at the site, cigarette dangling, eyebrows drawn. "That's not mine," he muttered. No map, no file, no old survey mentioned a structure like this. Kevin could feel it. They'd stumbled onto something left behind, and whoever buried it never meant it to be found. That night, they set up radar scans. The next morning, the data came in. A perfect 60-foot linear void ran parallel to the creek. Evenly spaced supports, symmetrical beams, not bedrock fissures, not erosion channels. Man-made. Tony crossed his arms, muttering that it was probably an abandoned 1900s drift. But even he couldn't explain the sealed ends or why the interior looked untouched. The oxidation patterns told the story. This thing hadn't been exposed to air in decades, maybe longer. Kevin pushed a borehole camera through a small core opening. The lens flickered, then focused, revealing timbers, rusted ore carts, and along one wall, something glinting under layers of frozen silt. It wasn't movement, it was reflection. Metal, bars, plates, maybe even coins. It was impossible to tell, but it was there. "We're looking at a tunnel," Kevin whispered, "and it's full of something." Tony didn't like it. The readings were too clean, too controlled. He went straight to the registry that night, scanning every record tied to Dominion Creek. When the coordinates matched nothing, he dug deeper. Old Yukon ledgers, forgotten claim maps, handwritten notes, and that's when he found it, the Dominion extension. A lost syndicate claim from the early 1900s, unregistered in modern systems. No ownership transfers, no closure documents, just a handwritten notice. Abandoned due to hazard and collapse. 1913. The description of the site made Kevin's skin crawl. Multiple tunnel breaches. Sudden loss of workers. Unspecified geological hazard was the only phrase attached. But the language felt sanitized, like someone wanted to hide what really happened. Tony told him to walk away, to seal the trench and forget it. But Kevin couldn't. The radar showed density spikes below 40 meters, higher than any known gold-bearing layer in the region. Something heavy was buried under that drift, and it wasn't gravel. When he brought it up again the next morning, Tony's answer was simple. "You open that, you're opening trouble." But Kevin had already made up his mind. By evening, he'd filed an exploratory license under a ghost company name, one that wouldn't trace back to the Beets family. It was risky, reckless even. But this wasn't about the next gold cleanout or camera payday. Something about that buried iron frame felt deliberate. Like a doorway, sealed on purpose. And Kevin wanted to know who sealed it, and what they were trying to keep hidden. That night, under cover of low fog and generator hum, he gathered only the crew he trusted, men who'd keep quiet no matter what they saw. No paperwork, no broadcast, no word to Tony. The excavator roared back to life, its arm biting into the frozen gravel where the frame had last been exposed. Floodlights glared against the mist as sparks flew from the cutting torch. By dawn, the reinforced shaft took shape, steel braces anchoring deep into the permafrost. Kevin climbed into the harness first, radio clipped to his vest, floodlight on his shoulder. He descended slowly, boots scraping against the timber frame, each breath echoing against the hollow walls. The air was stale but dry, no sign of groundwater seepage or frost melt. That alone was impossible for a Yukon tunnel sealed for over a century. Whatever they'd uncovered had been built to last, locked away from decay and time itself. When Kevin hit bottom, the beam from his helmet light swept across the chamber. It wasn't a natural drift. The walls were squared, reinforced with iron and oak, still strong under the weight of the permafrost above. On the ground lay shovels, picks, and lanterns, encased in a glaze of frozen silt. Perfectly preserved, as if the miners who last held them had walked away only hours ago. But there were no bodies, no signs of panic. Everything was arranged, purposeful. Near the far wall, half buried in gravel, sat a rusted ore cart. Kevin wiped away a century's worth of grime with his glove and stopped cold. The cart wasn't filled with gravel or pay dirt. It was packed with rectangular shapes wrapped in decayed canvas. He tore one corner open, and a dull, gold-toned sheen glimmered under the light. A bar, heavy, smooth, stamped with an unfamiliar crest, not a mint mark, not a mine insignia. The edges were beveled with precision far beyond what 1900s Yukon equipment could produce. He lifted one with both hands, muscles straining. 40 pounds at least. Real, solid, and nothing like the gold they'd ever pulled from a sluice box. He shouted for Tony to come down, but by the time his father's boots hit the tunnel floor, Kevin's hands were still shaking. "This isn't placer gold," he muttered. "Someone made this." Tony stared at the stamp, brow furrowed. "Not Canadian, not American. That's something else." They both turned toward the tunnel's deeper darkness, where the radar had hinted at more. It didn't take long to find the next clue. Near a pile of collapsed timber was a small, tin-lined chest, its hinges sealed with black wax that crumbled under Kevin's knife. Inside were ledgers wrapped in oilcloth, pages stiff with age but intact. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, the kind used in official documentation. Across the top of each entry, Dominion Project YK-19. Shipments, assay weights, and coded initials filled the pages. 8,000 ounces moved in less than 6 months, then nothing. No closure note, no final tally. The last pages contained an abrupt scrawl, the ink blotted as if written in haste. Seal the tunnel, protect the reserve. Dominion must never know. Kevin read it twice. The name signed beneath the final line made his chest tighten. E. Kessler. The same prospector whispered about in Yukon folklore, the one who'd vanished without a trace after claiming to have struck the purest gold ever found. Historians said he'd gone mad. Miners said he'd gone rich. But now, standing in that sealed drift, Kevin knew the truth. Kessler hadn't disappeared. He'd buried something too valuable or too dangerous to reveal. The find should have ended there, but curiosity never sleeps in the Yukon. Kevin's tech team brought in a thermal drone, sending it deeper into the shaft where the ground radar showed a temperature anomaly. The feed revealed a wall of frozen gravel that didn't match the rest of the tunnel structure. A false wall, deliberate backfill. He climbed up himself, drill in hand, and bored straight through. The bit broke through with a sudden drop, releasing a puff of trapped air so cold it burned his throat. Beyond it was a second chamber, larger, darker, lined with thick black timbers. He squeezed through the breach and froze. Crates, dozens of them, all stenciled in faded white paint. Assayed concentrate. The boxes were stacked in columns, untouched, sealed with iron bands. Kevin pried one open, expecting ore. Instead, he found dense brown sediment, dull, grainy, unremarkable, until the wash hose hit it. The water ran clear for a moment, then shimmered gold. The entire crate glowed like liquid fire under the light. Concentrated gold, high-purity fines, refined and packed for transport, then abandoned. He called for a scale. A single crate weighed nearly 300 pounds. Even at conservative estimates, it held nearly $2 million worth of refined concentrate. And there were over 30 crates. The deeper he counted, the more impossible it seemed. Whoever sealed this vault hadn't been hiding a failed mine. They'd been concealing a private reserve, a fortune that was never declared, never taxed, never meant to be found. Kevin stood there, surrounded by the silent hum of history, the air heavy with dust and disbelief. The Dominion Project wasn't a legend. It was real. And judging by what they'd just uncovered, this was only the first vault. The radar had shown one more anomaly further down the drift, larger than both chambers combined, and still sealed. He motioned for the crew to power up the drill. They'd come this far. There was no chance he was leaving another sealed chamber untouched. The ground monitors flickered as the bit carved into the frozen gravel, sending low tremors through the floor. A deep metallic echo rolled up the shaft, distant but sharp, like something shifting beneath the weight of time itself. Kevin frowned. "Hold it," he said into the radio. But it was already too late. The tunnel trembled first as a faint vibration, subtle enough that Kevin ignored it. Then the sound deepened, a rolling, guttural rumble that made the support beams groan. Dust rained from the ceiling, fine and gray. The crew froze, glancing at one another as the floor began to shift under their boots. Kevin shouted for everyone to pull back, the echo bouncing off the timbered walls. Before they could retreat, the roof above the first chamber buckled with a crack like thunder. A cascade of gravel poured through, smashing against the crates, filling the air with choking silt. The floodlights flickered, turning the gold-streaked dust into a storm of fire and shadow. He yelled into his radio, ordering an immediate evacuation. The sound of collapsing beams drowned out the static. The tunnel wasn't just failing, it was designed to fail. The way the braces gave way, the pattern of the collapse, it was intentional, engineered to cave inward. A safeguard meant to bury the site once disturbed. Someone, long ago, had planned for this exact breach. As the crew scrambled for the shaft, one of the stacked crates cracked open. A metallic spill spilled across the dirt floor. Bars, dozens of them, sliding through the dust, catching the light. Each one identical, perfectly cast, each stamped with that same unknown insignia. The camera caught everything. Kevin crouched in the chaos, holding one bar under the flickering light, shouting over the roar, "We just found the Dominion Reserve! It's real!" The feed cut a second later as the ceiling behind him collapsed, sealing the chamber in a roar of debris. The ground above them shifted, swallowing the tunnel's mouth under tons of gravel. Outside, Tony stood by the monitors, watching the feed go dead. The ground under his boots pulsed, then stilled. Silence. Nothing remained but a mound of disturbed earth where the shaft had been. By the time daylight returned, the entire site looked like it had never been touched. Only fragments of twisted rebar and splintered timbers jutted from the mud. Inspectors arrived within hours, alerted by automated safety sensors. They documented the collapse, took coordinates, and filed it as an instability incident. Kevin tried to explain, to show them the footage, but when he pulled up the recordings on his tablet, every video stopped seconds before the cave-in. Files corrupted. Timestamps scrambled. The data drives that should have held hours of continuous footage showed only blank screens. Even worse, the few samples he'd managed to send out before the collapse, those small fragments of gold and concentrate, never arrived at the assay lab. The shipping manifest showed no trace of the parcels. The courier's tracking number simply vanished from the system. Kevin called every contact he had, but nobody could explain it. Tony said nothing for a long time, just stared at the empty pit. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tired, almost resigned. "This isn't the first time something's been erased up here," he said. "You dig too deep into the wrong hole, and the story disappears before it's told." The camps lit up with rumors within days. Word spread fast, faster than Kevin could control. Some said they'd uncovered a government gold reserve. Others whispered it was military storage, a Cold War stockpile sealed and forgotten. A few claimed it wasn't gold at all, but something worse: chemical, radioactive, classified. The Beets name, once tied to Yukon gold, became the center of a story no one could confirm and no one could disprove. The Dominion Reserve, the vanished footage, the missing samples. Every miner had an opinion, and none of them matched. Weeks later, a small envelope arrived at Kevin's trailer. No return address. Inside was a single USB drive. No note, no markings, just the device, wrapped in plain white paper. Against his better judgment, he plugged it into his laptop. A series of old government survey files appeared, labeled with year stamps from 1968. Each one carried the seal of the Department of Northern Development. The first document referenced a prohibited structure beneath Dominion Creek, classified Level 4, restricted to wartime personnel only. A scanned memo followed, describing the area as an underground containment and reserve site, established under Operation Yukon Reserve. The deeper Kevin dug, the stranger it became. The operation wasn't about mining, it was about storage. Notes described heavy cargo shipments moved north during the 1940s, possibly from decommissioned treasury reserves or foreign holdings. The tunnel's architecture, the reinforced timbers, even the engineered collapse sequence, all matched designs used in Cold War-era reserve vaults. The report mentioned material assets of sovereign value, hidden to protect against potential invasion or financial collapse. The names of contractors were blacked out. The coordinates of the site were partially redacted, but Kevin recognized enough to know exactly where they led. Dominion Creek, his dig. He scrolled to the last file. It was a summary written decades later, marked Declassified 1998. The final note stopped his breath cold. Partial recovery completed 1968. Remaining chambers sealed under continued federal oversight. That meant someone had returned after Kessler, found part of the vault, extracted what they needed, and resealed the rest. The section he'd found wasn't the main reserve. It was just one compartment of something larger, something still buried. The final line confirmed it. Second chamber remains intact. Access restricted. Coordinates redacted for security. Kevin leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the map overlay. The faint red outline of the creek's underground channels still burned on the screen. Somewhere beneath the frozen ground, deeper than the collapsed drift, there was still another vault, bigger, untouched, and if the documents were real, it wasn't abandoned. It was being monitored. He copied the files, encrypted them, and unplugged the drive. Outside, the Yukon wind howled through the dark, carrying the smell of diesel and cold iron. He didn't tell Tony about the files, not yet. There was too much he didn't understand. But one thing was certain now. What they'd uncovered wasn't lost gold. It was something built, hidden, and guarded for generations, and whoever sealed that tunnel all those years ago wasn't done protecting it. For the next few days, Kevin kept the drive close, in his truck, then under his bunk, always checking for movement on the ridge. The air around camp felt different now, tense and watched. Drones that once mapped pay dirt readings began to lose signal. The generator flickered at random, tools went missing, and the radio picked up faint static, like another transmission overlapping their own. Kevin didn't say a word, but the unease was spreading. The first trucks rolled in just before midnight. No logos, no headlights, only the low rumble of diesel engines against the frozen ground. Kevin woke to the vibration, stepped outside, and saw the beams of high-powered floodlights piercing the ridge where the Dominion Tunnel had once stood. Unmarked flatbeds lined the access road, flanked by dark SUVs with their engines idling. A group of men in reflective jackets, faces shadowed, moved with silent precision, marking out the perimeter. No one spoke to the Beets crew. A single security officer approached Tony, handed him a printed notice, and left without explanation. The order was simple: immediate evacuation of the site due to environmental reassessment. By dawn, the ridge looked like a military zone. Heavy cranes extended over the pit, digging deeper than Kevin's team had ever gone. He wasn't allowed within 100 meters of the boundary, but from the tree line, he could see massive cylindrical containers being lifted from the ground, each sealed, metallic, and covered instantly with tarps. The air smelled of fuel and iron, and under the hum of generators came a deeper, pulsing vibration. Machinery operating underground. Every time he tried to record with his phone, the signal scrambled. His drone feed later showed blank interference during the entire 6-hour operation. When he woke the next morning, the noise was gone. The ridge was empty. The cranes, the trucks, the guards, all vanished. Fresh soil had been laid over the site, pressed flat and even. Tire tracks led nowhere, ending abruptly at the tree line. The only trace of activity was a faint heat signature buried in the topsoil when Kevin checked with a thermal lens, still warm, as if something had been sealed inside the earth just hours earlier. When he replayed the drone footage, the last frame caught a fleeting glimpse before the interference began. 2 flatbeds loaded with large, sealed containers, tarped in military green, escorted by black vehicles heading north. Tony didn't speak of it. He called the crew in, told them to pack up the camp, and left the site paperwork unsigned. But within days, he was summoned to Whitehorse for a private consultation with a federal liaison from Natural Resources Canada. Kevin went along, uninvited, sitting in the corner while a man in a pressed suit and government ID spoke calmly across the table. The liaison's tone was courteous, his message surgical. "We appreciate your cooperation," he said. "The situation has been resolved under federal jurisdiction. To compensate your operation, we're prepared to make an offer that should cover any disruption and more." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement and an attached payment schedule. The numbers were staggering, enough to fund 3 mining operations outright, plus an unspoken guarantee of future cooperation opportunities. Tony stared at the papers, silent. The man's voice didn't waver. "This is a quiet resolution. It benefits everyone. No press, no attention, no historical audits." He turned to Kevin. "But the agreement applies to all family parties. No discussion, no disclosure, no replication of data related to your recent excavation." Kevin's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to erase it," he said. The man smiled faintly. "Not erase. Protect." Tony folded his arms. "Protect who? You or us?" The liaison didn't answer, only tapped the folder. "You'll find it's generous." Back at camp, the silence between father and son was heavier than the permafrost. Tony wanted to take the deal. He'd seen enough men lose everything fighting shadows they couldn't name. "You can't win against people who already buried the evidence," he told Kevin. "We walk away rich and alive." But Kevin couldn't let it go. "If we stay quiet, we become part of the cover-up," he said. "You think they'll stop here?" That wasn't gold for mining. It was storage, maybe government, maybe military. But it's history, Dad. We found something that rewrites everything we thought we knew. The argument split the family in two. Half the crew sided with Tony, tired, wary, ready to cash out and forget. The others backed Kevin, believing they had stumbled into something too important to silence. For weeks, the Beets camp fractured under tension, the once united operation reduced to whispers and suspicion. Then Tony signed. The payout arrived in untraceable transfers, the paperwork vanished into government archives, and the Dominion site was wiped from all active mining records. Kevin left camp that night without a word. He drove north alone. The map of the valley still burned into his memory. Months passed before anyone heard from him again. When winter set in, Kevin returned to the ridge under a moonless sky. No trucks, no lights, no cameras, just him, a snow-covered field, and a portable geotech scanner strapped to his back. The surface looked untouched, but when he powered on the scanner, the readings came alive in pulsing blue arcs. Beneath the permafrost, deep below where the original tunnel had collapsed, a signal spiked so violently the sensors maxed out. Metal density far beyond any natural deposit. A chamber, larger, deeper, perfectly intact. They hadn't taken everything. Something was still down there. He moved in a slow circle, tracing the edges of the anomaly. The shape wasn't random. It was symmetrical, like a vault or a capsule. As he triangulated the signal, his radio crackled to life with static. Then a faint voice, his friend from camp, running remote monitoring. "Kev, whatever's under there, it's still active. I'm getting readings like there's power." Kevin crouched near the snow-packed surface, staring at the scanner's glowing map. The heat trace pulsed once, like a heartbeat. He exhaled into the cold, breath fogging in front of him. "They didn't get it all," he said quietly into the radio. "There's still something down here." Static swallowed his next words. The transmission cut. His friend called back twice. No response. The GPS marker on Kevin's unit froze at the ridgeline, then blinked out completely. By dawn, his snowmobile was still parked at the base of the site. The only sign of movement was a narrow trail of footprints leading toward the dig area and stopping at the center of the ridge. Search teams found no cave-in, no open shaft, no sign of struggle, just disturbed snow, as if the ground had shifted slightly after he'd stood there. Days later, Tony arrived himself, wrapped in a parka, expression grim. He walked the ridge, scanned the empty ground, and for a moment thought he heard something beneath the wind. A deep, rhythmic vibration, faint but steady, echoing from far below. He stood still, listening. Then, without a word, he turned back toward his truck. Weeks passed before the ground froze solid again, sealing whatever lay below in another layer of Yukon winter. But late one night, long after the world had moved on, a satellite feed captured faint thermal activity beneath Dominion Creek. A pulse, steady and localized, exactly where Kevin had last stood. Whatever was buried there wasn't gone. It was waiting, and somewhere deep under that frozen valley, the Dominion Reserve, or whatever secret it truly held, was still alive.